Can you share with us your perspectives on how philanthropy has evolved broadly in your work experience in the nonprofit world and for you personally in your own life?
Well, first of all, thank you all so much for inviting me to join you on the panel today. Nancy and Barbara have always been a fan of the work you all do at CAP Strategies and this forum, and I've learned so much from both of you. So thank you for inviting me. And I just love this theme of manifesting wealth, wisdom, and well-being, because to me, that is so much about the work we do at JH Philanthropy. So when I think about philanthropy, it's both personal and professional for me, because philanthropy is personal. And I right out of college, went into the Peace Corps and have been on this path ever since. But it's also the work that I do. So I'm going to talk to you about a little bit of an evolution in that. First, when I first started my career, I was in the nonprofit space at an organization called Koehler Collective here in Chicago. So I was a recipient of philanthropy and I was a fundraiser. I was working with individuals to help bring resources to the organization. So there I saw both the power of high impact volunteers, the power of dollars spent, but also where, if there are not clear objectives and clear communications, how sometimes that can be a challenging situation. I then helped start A Better Chicago, which was the venture philanthropy fund here in the Chicagoland area focused on education. And venture philanthropy then moves from just kind of general giving to being more strategic, really diving deep into organizations, understanding what's driving them, investing significant dollars and really helping them to grow. So bringing more of a business mindset to philanthropy. And I feel like in this space in the last 10 years, it was a big focus on venture philanthropy. And that's what a lot of people talked about. And then we had the pandemic. And that, even within my career, after I left another venture philanthropy fund and started JH Philanthropy in 2019, pre-pandemic, we have since in that time seen more of a shift to what we'd call trust-based philanthropy and what we at JH Philanthropy call nonprofit-centered philanthropy. Because in our work, we work with individuals, foundations, corporations, and foundations and families on really bringing their legacies to life and moving more money into the philanthropic sector. So how do we do that in ways that partner with philanthropy's personal, for the philanthropist, what really motivates you, but then what really is in the best interest of the people that you're trying to serve and creating the greatest impact in the communities. So I'll have lots to say about that, but I'll turn it over to my co-panelists.
So pleased to be here with all of you and sharing this space with Julie and with Kay. So I wanted to talk particularly about two specific areas. One that Julie sort of referenced, this idea about trust-based philanthropies and sort of these very large gifts from people like Mackenzie Scott and Melinda Gates and others. So sort of that is sort of one aspect that we've seen sort of evolve in a very public way in recent years. And then the other is the rise of Giving Circle, or what one would call community philanthropy. They might seem like two extremes, but there's some linkage between them. While most of us don't have necessarily the billions to give away, I feel that there are some things that we can still learn from what Mackenzie Scott does and how she thinks about her philanthropy. Admittedly, she has a fantastic group of advisors who do the due diligence, et cetera, and who understand the role that nonprofits play in their communities. So she can actually, have somebody outsource some of that work. And I know Julie's work sort of can help in a similar fashion. While not all of us can have access to these advisors, I think we can certainly have access to the tools that they might use to educate ourselves to choose the causes that we feel most passionate about. So there's some learning even from these ultra high net worth donors, where we can give to the issues and be strategic, be thoughtful, be mindful of who we want to give to based on causes that based on problems that we're incensed by, that we want to change, right? And I do want to touch on this other area that has really grown and evolved over the past several years, the giving circles or community philanthropy. I see we have folks here from Impact 100. Yeah, the Impact of the Palm Beaches. So it's great to be here, to have you here. This is an area where you really are able to join like-minded people to pool funds and to support the issues that you care about. So you're in partnership, you're in community with other people who think similarly, where you can pool your funds and also learn about how to give strategically, how to give thoughtfully, and sort of multiply your own giving. So I think in many large cities have Impact 100, where members pool about generally $1,000 each, and give as much as $100,000 in grants through this sort of community-led effort. For younger folks who are starting out in their philanthropy, it doesn't have to be $1,000. There are lower requirements. You can find giving circles where you don't have to give much beyond sometimes $75 if you're a young student, or up to $250 a year. And you can find most of these in your communities through community foundations, women's funds in your community. So for me, that was one of the first places I started. I'm a member even today, after all these years, of the Asian Giving Circle, and of which is at our community foundation in Chicago, and also I'm a member, or I donate to India Development Service, which supports community and development projects in India, because this is India is where I grew up, and I care about what happens in my home country. So for me, these are ways of giving back to my own community, and sort of the evolution. I think Nancy mentioned in one of our previous conversations that 70% of giving circles are led by women, and the membership, over 70% is women. So you're in really good company. So I'll stop there.
Hey, how about yourself?
Yeah, so first I want to thank you, Nancy and Barbara, for allowing me to be here. It's wonderful to be on this with such great panelists. So it's interesting for me. Barbara, for those of you who were on early, Barbara mentioned the Rockefellers. And, when we think about 200 years ago, right, there were like 4 or 5 families that controlled all the philanthropic wealth, right? It was the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the Fords, right? And now we've really, over the last several years, homogenized philanthropy so that anyone can participate, right? And so I love to look at that shift. Those trends are really fascinating to me. And I think along with that groundswell of people who can now engage in philanthropy is kind of what Sujata touched on, which is there is a responsibility now to educate ourselves on how we direct our philanthropic gifts, right? And to ensure they're being put to good use. So it's really fascinating to me how people educate themselves. So I'm a baby boomer. If you were a baby boomer or a Gen Xer, perhaps, when we were growing up, it was all the Better Business Bureau. I don't know if you remember that, but it was like we trusted where to go based on their BBB rating. And right. And if you look at the nonprofit space, that would translate to Charity Navigator or GuideStar. And we rely on those. But if you're a millennial or younger, you have taken your peers as self-reliance, and like a restaurant review on Yelp, you trust others to help define where the charities are that you should invest your time and your talent and treasure, as someone said in the chat. And so I think as women in this new philanthropic space, sometimes for the first time in our generations, we need to really think about how we build a puzzle of believing charity watchdog groups, trusting our friends, right, and influencers, but also looking at nonprofits and evaluating your experience with them to get to a point of trust, as opposed to jumping and trusting them because of their name or who they are or what a watchdog group says. That personal experience is really important. And I think we have also empirical data at our fingertips, as someone alluded to, where we can, go to a charity's tax return, their 990, and really ensure that the financial support we might be giving them is being used in the way that we care about. And so it's a lot more complicated in that way than it was 200 years ago with the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, for instance. And so for me, I know I'm incredibly busy, as I'm sure are all of you. It's like, how do you invest the time to research an organization and to give your spare time, of which we have very little, to really build confidence in an organization and determine that what you care about within that organization and its mission, how do you want your funds directed? Is it just unrestricted dollars to support them, or do you really want to target where your funds go? And that takes time to understand the organization. So I think, as we build wealth and begin to make these educational decisions for ourselves, we find ourselves, not unlike everything in a woman's life, in a situation of a balancing act, right? Like, how do we find that? How do we ensure that we have enough to support ourselves personally, like financially, for our lifetime, while really feeling this, being compelled to support other people? And I don't know that we necessarily have a role model for how to do this. It's like many of us have broken the glass ceiling. Now we're kind of breaking the philanthropic ceiling, right? I mean, I feel like, we're not in a position where our spouses are providing for us, right? We have built this capacity and we want to make a difference for ourselves in the future. But we also know statistically in 3 generations, 90% of the time, the wealth will be gone. So how do we protect that? And it really is a new conundrum for me, I think for all of us. Nancy talked about, planning tools, and they're a fantastic way to preserve and grow your wealth. And I also think we deserve the right to experience the joy of being able to see the results of our gifts while we're alive, right? So from a nonprofit perspective, I don't think we necessarily I think Cure Search does, but I think nonprofits in general, we don't always do a great job of helping donors define their philanthropic interest and intent, and then showing them the immense value of the support that they're giving. And women have become the philanthropists of our time, and we deserve that because collectively we really can make a huge impact. So I guess I would just close by saying that philanthropic power that women have has evolved over the last decade. And I feel like we're defining that roadmap of what to do with that for ourselves and for future generations.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, what you've just said, Kay. And, Nancy and I have a lot of conversations with women who, especially at later stages in their career, a lot of women in our women's forum are, and actually post-pandemic, there's been a lot of sense of, okay, I need to do more purposeful work. And they're actually looking also to get involved more actively, whether it's on a board or actually working, maybe scaling back and still staying active and engaged, but working at a nonprofit and pivoting to give their time and talents there professionally. I think you did that perhaps. So do you still, and anyone can comment on this, do you see that trend, or do you think that's a nice opportunity still to bring some of those traditional corporate talents into the nonprofit world, or are there some challenges there? I'd love some comments on that.
I'll jump in. I would just say it is challenging because there is some backlash in leaders running nonprofits like for-profit entities. There have been TED Talks that got some negative comments. There's a new book out called Uncharitable that kind of addresses this, right? And so I think it's a fine balance between using skills that you acquire in the for-profit world in the best way possible in the nonprofit world.
I'd echo that. It's interesting. When I started back at Cara back in, I think 2006, I was one of the few employees at that point with an MBA. And now as nonprofits are looking to hire folks in leadership roles, they're looking for folks with some business background, with an MBA, with an ability to both learn from and speak with the community and represent the communities they're serving in the best case scenario, as well as bring a perspective from the for-profit space. So I think it's important to think about yourself if you're making a pivot like that as a bridge, right? How can you bring in best practices from the for-profit world, but also not think that you've got all the answers to it. I think too often we think, oh, this is, it's an efficiency problem. I can fix this, right? And understanding that I'm never a fan of this is just the way we do things, but there are different stakeholders that nonprofits are managing, different resources. And so just like starting at any new business and any new company, you would need to take the time to really understand all the different complexities, the challenges and opportunities. So I say go for it, but also know that any change, whether it's a career shift or looking to get on a board, it takes a little dating to figure out what the right place is, what the right mission, what the right team is, because all those things are just as important. The mission alignment is important, but it's also like, is it the right stage, size, and team that you're working with to really make that work? You're not going to love it every single day, right? It's still work.
Yeah, I echo what Julie said. And all I'll add to that is if you're thinking of this pivot from sort of a corporate to nonprofit, in whatever, sort of a strong dose of humility will help you go a long way, and your willingness to learn and be curious, I think also helps you go a long way. And as well, but your financial acumen and your sales ability are all very important as well. So I'll sort of say that here.
Yeah, and I would just add the relationship component that makes you successful in the business environment is what will make you successful in a nonprofit world, right? It is really important to make connections with people, understand their interests, and then meet their need, just as you would in a sales organization, in the for-profit environment. That the process is very similar.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think about the word connection that you just, mentioned, Kay. So I am a member of, Impact the Palm Beaches down here, which is an amazing organization. And as we talked about, collaborative giving, collaborative philanthropy, and all the other trends that we're seeing, impact investing, trust-based philanthropy, venture philanthropy, there's so much going on in this space. And I'm curious about, Julie, you mentioned venture philanthropy, pros and cons, what most excites you about that? And maybe Sujata, if you want to comment on the giving circles. One of the things I think about is the importance of our giving and being in these communities, but also the importance of staying connected to what matters to us. So I'm curious, Julie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. And I also want to respond to the conversation happening in the chat about salaries in the nonprofit space too, because I think it's all really related. And I was starting to feverishly type back when you pinned me here. So, I think that it's an ongoing challenge, and I'll address that first and then go to venture philanthropy, Nancy. Yes, oftentimes in the nonprofit space, folks are not compensated in a market rate or a way that we would see them otherwise compensated in the for-profit space. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the primary reasons is that donors don't often, when they're looking at the financials and thinking about where they want to invest their dollars, they think, I want it to go directly to community. I want it to go directly to impact. And I don't want to invest in a strong CEO, a strong CFO, HR, et cetera. Now, not all organizations, just like a startup, right, are going to necessarily be ready for these high salaries. But we have had too many conversations, even with our clients too, about, well, I don't want to invest in that, African-American male is making $150K and he's been doing this for the last 10 years. It's like, well, if he were in the for-profit world, he'd be making 3 times that. And instead he's dedicated his life to transforming fatherhood. And so why wouldn't we want to compensate him? So it's a dialogue we all as donors need to be able to continue to support too. So, when I think about venture philanthropy and some of the pros and cons there, the idea of venture philanthropy is actually not dissimilar to collaborative philanthropy. It's really about pooling resources together, identifying the high impact organizations or interventions that are making a difference in a community, investing financial resources as well as management support or technical resources in those organizations, partnering with them over a number of years and really helping them to grow, scale, or go to the next phase. So the essence of that, I think, is very important, right? The idea of pooling resources together, the idea of doing due diligence at the upfront before making an investment, partnering with organizations over a long term, as well as providing general operating support to really help trust these organizations to invest those dollars where they see they need it most. The challenge to venture philanthropy has come that while venture philanthropy became the sexy thing, it also became the MBA financial model, venture capital space. And so it started to actually perpetuate the challenge of, here are the organizations with the professional development team and leadership team who know how to navigate this diligence and moving dollars away from some of the community-based organizations that are doing such important work. So while venture philanthropy, A Better Chicago, New Profit, Robin Hood Foundation, Tipping Point in San Francisco all became kind of the sexy new thing, now all of those organizations, as well as a lot of donors and clients we work with too, are now coming back and kind of understanding, well, we still need to do our diligence. We still need to learn about the organizations, as we've all talked about. We still want to invest and be able to trust those organizations, but we're going to understand from where they're coming. Is this an emerging early stage organization? How might I be able to partner with them to help them to get their pitch better, right? To understand how to engage with donors. And so I think the pandemic helped because it helped people realize we just need to invest in basic services, and it might not be the sexy thing. But it also, it's began to level the playing field. I would say we're not there yet. There's still a significant power dynamic, I think, in funding and nonprofit, but we're getting there.
Hey,
I was just going to add that there's such power in venture philanthropy if it's done correctly. I'm sure you'd agree. It's in the healthcare field, we always talk about the cystic fibrosis example, right? Where it was discovered that there was one genetic mutation, and if they could just focus enough resources on it, they could come up with a new drug. And so in 12 years, they did that, right? They secured $40 million from investors and targeted this genetic mutation, and a new drug came out of that, which 12 years is unheard of in the healthcare field. It's incredibly fast, right? So I think, to Julie's point, if you can find the right thing where you know what the impact will be and how long it will take to see that impact, it's a beautiful thing to support.
I'll go back to your previous question, Nancy, about community or collaborative philanthropy and the joys and challenges of it. I think that the joy is mostly for the philanthropist, right? Because you can enter philanthropy at any level. You can find a community of donors that think the same way you do, that care about the same issues you do, and you come together and your money gets pooled, which means you can give more money to the organizations that you're working with. So you learn about how to give strategically. You learn about, and you do it with others, and it's fun, and it's social, and you really have an opportunity to build community. So I love it. But I often see, in my experience, a lot of the giving circles that I work with, perhaps because of the way they're set up, are heavily reliant on good leadership and good continued leadership over time. And that's not always possible. I think a place where there are ebbs and flows in giving circles is often when there aren't sort of good leaders to help grow the giving circle, manage the giving circle, manage the processes, and so on. So that's one piece. The other piece I would say is something that came up just a moment ago about the importance of general operating funds. Most giving circles that I know, that I work with, don't work that way, right? They shift their priorities every so often, and they are often focused on sort of either issues or innovation or sort of the latest and greatest thing. And so there's a fashion to it, which I think is there in all kinds of philanthropy. We won't go there, but particularly at these levels. And then there's of course, often in collaborative philanthropy, if you're not careful, I find that you want to give a little bit of money to a lot of people, and impact, I think, is a little bit different in that. But some giving circles, once you get together, it's very hard to say no. Even though no is a full sentence. So that becomes then a challenge as well. So that's sort of the ups and downs of community philanthropy.
May I add a quick point on that? Sujata, I really appreciate your perspective on that, because I do look at you as a leader in that space. And we work with a Chicago Giving Circle. I put a link in the chat, which is a family here, a group of families in Chicago. There are 15 families really that have come together, pooled their resources, and we invest in 2 nonprofits each year. We invest $300,000 over 3 years, so it's $100,000 a year for 3 years. And we've been doing, just my team and I, a lot of research on how to make this even more effective, because Sujata, I think you're right. One, they are our clients and they are doing it because it's personal and they care a lot about having an impact. But sometimes that impact can feel misguided. And so if it's our job, because we are staff, to help run the Giving Circle, how do we help educate them about the challenges and opportunities of investing in nonprofits, right? Creating, to Kay's point in the beginning, help them to become more proximate with the organizations they're investing in, helping them to really understand and get to know it. Because I think giving circles, it could be all about donor intent. And while that's wonderful, we need to get closer into actually how could we actually have the impact we're looking to have in the communities, and lean on the experts that are doing the work, which are those that are in service of and closest to the community. And so the best ones I've seen, because we've been doing a lot of studies on this, has been those that both support the needs of the members, but also who they are comfortable learning, changing, that part of the reason they're in this giving circle is to be more effective philanthropists and not just feel good about where their dollars are going.
The other thing I'll just ask quickly, I don't want this to be too controversial, but is there any concern, or do you anticipate any issues with the impact of the Supreme Court's decision around affirmative action, and will that impact philanthropy or grants or funding? We are seeing it impact some employee resource groups that focus on certain populations, and some lawsuits there. So just didn't know if there's concern in the philanthropic world in that regard.
All right. Well, I sit on the board of a great organization in Chicago called Hope Chicago that provides scholarship, room and board, and all, everything needed to go to college to five high schools in the Chicagoland community. And every student in those high schools, plus a parent or guardian of those parents, actually get, full ride, everything else to college. And so, thinking about this, I actually turned to Hope Chicago to think about really what's the stance there. And, and I am seeing, regardless of affirmative action wasn't perfect, and regardless of your political viewpoints on it, I do believe that equal access to opportunities for all students is only possible with sustained, proactive, and intentional measures to create access to post-secondary education. And so to me, that's a fundamental belief for me personally, but we're also seeing a lot of our donors and clients lean in there and say, we have to invest in our education system. We also have to look at colleges and say, like, this is not working. And, the costs and, all of the inequities related to post-secondary education. So there's a systemic challenge in all of it. And so we are seeing some donors really leaning into investing in helping to get all students into college. And I think that that's important.
I think it's really interesting. I'm just sitting here thinking back at the large nonprofits that I've been a part of, you know, the national ones that have hundreds of millions of dollars. And there are very few people of color in positions in those organizations. And for some reason, that seems to be less of an issue in more grassroots organizations, right? And so there are a couple boundaries that I think need to be broken. The first is in large organizations, they are predominantly like a 90% female workforce, but still often run by men, right? Which is a different issue. And then also very few people of color. So I think, you know, one place to start as nonprofit leaders is with our boards, to make sure that our boards are, which we just achieved 50-50 board. I was so excited last year, and working on the diversity of our board, and have a huge diversity now within our staffing population, right? So I think it's up to us to set the model. And then the question is, how do we reach down to younger people, right, who are going into this field and lift them up to be in a large organization where they can achieve some financial stability that maybe they wouldn't, right, in a smaller organization where there are more funds to support them, and help build their career so that they can run, right, an organization as a person of color, as a female, breaking boundaries in this field. I think there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to jump into our final question. So, you know, many women in our community, as I mentioned before, are kind of approaching their what's next chapter of life. So, you know, I guess maybe Sujata, you could kick this off. You know, what do you think is most essential for women to think about as they consider philanthropy being part of their legacy?
So Barbara, two weighty words, right? Legacy and philanthropy. And to me, they can be very intimidating. So I want to sort of simplify it for myself, and hopefully it resonates with some of you. So one question I sort of begin to ask yourself is, what injustice are you incensed by? What makes you really angry that you would like to see change? Like, if we start there, sort of you sort of figure out what your passions are. You can then, you know, sort of seek to educate yourself on who's working to address this in your community, in your region. I know Kay talked a little bit about the kinds of due diligence you can do. You know, if you have the means and the resources, you know, Julie and her team, places like that can help, as can Nancy and Barbara as well. I think you need to decide the kind of resources that you have to expend. You know, one of you brought up, like, whether is it time, is it talent, is it treasure? So does volunteering your time and expertise make more sense to you? So you get to see sort of that proximal state with a nonprofit or a bunch of nonprofits that you're interested in. You know, Kay mentioned joining boards. Julie has mentioned that in the past. I think I don't want to sort of let this idea of philanthropy and legacy go without saying that it's so important that you make a financial gift. You can do, you know, your time and talent, but at the end of the day, I do urge women, I do urge everyone actually, that even if you give your time and talent, you should make a financial gift to the cause about which you're passionate about, and make it till it hurts. Make it to the best of your ability.
If I could, I just add, and I think, Julie, you're the expert on this for sure on this panel, but that, you know, one thing that I think works well is to give, you know, relatively small gifts to a bunch of organizations that you are completely passionate about, that are solving an injustice that you have an issue with, and just see how they steward your gift. If they're paying attention, if they're responding to you, if you're getting the reaction that you would hope to get, because that will tell you wonders about what your relationship will be like. And for those people who reach out and want you to be a part of their philanthropic family, those are the ones you want to lean into.
No, thank you. I'll double click on that. You know, when I think about this, to me, it's three points: be intentional, learn, and then lean in. So often, you know, all of you, all of us have been probably intentional in so many areas of our lives, personal, professional. But I think people are like, I want to get involved in the community. I want to be a philanthropist, but they're afraid to put out their philanthropic vision or goal or the change they want to see. Sujata, I loved how you said that, like, what's the injustice that like sets you on fire? So we've got to think about that. Two, it's not always going to come to you right away. And you're not going to know, as Kay says, what organizations are doing the best work or what's the best fit for you. So make a number of small gifts, volunteer with a number of those organizations. And then once you identify what does fit in, then lean in, make a donation, advocate for those organizations. If you're on the board, it's not just like you're on a board. You have an important role there to play, to be an advocate for those organizations, provide resources, provide guidance, and be an extension of that organization. And it's a really incredible opportunity, but I understand it can be so intimidating. I have so many even friends and family who are like, I want to be on a board, but I don't know how to get started. Like, that is a very real thing. And so much of it is just ask around, work with a couple of different organizations and just, you know, call them up and volunteer, see what works. And then you're building a relationship before you get on in a leadership role in something like that.
And it's interesting. I would add one other thing, two real quick comments is accountability is really important. You know, holding nonprofits and accountable is really important, depending on, you know, just in terms of how you're giving, whether it's through your gift and you want to understand and you should understand before giving it, but really holding, I think there's an element of accountability in philanthropy as well. And then just a comment on the small gifts. You know, one of the things that I love about Impact, or when I led a giving circle for the Chicago Foundation for Women, you know, a lot of times you get to see in your community grassroots effort, you know, grassroots small organizations that are really boots on the ground doing, you know, amazing work. So just, you know, something else to think about. But
Nancy, I wanted to add on that too, because I think that was one of the most powerful things of my giving circle, was being on the grants committee, so that we got to see all the grants. Yeah. And in fact, we gave a very small grant, just a $5,000 new idea grant. And we did a video interview instead of a long, big proposal. And we've really tried to simplify the proposals so that they don't skew towards the more established nonprofits, and that you make it more accessible for some of the earlier ones. So not a huge grant, but just like, let's fund an idea. And that was very trust-based, right? And then the other is, you know, I decided what sets me on fire. And one of the things is homelessness. And I looked on LinkedIn and I looked at our local nonprofit and I saw who the head of the board was. And I saw that a good friend of mine was linked in with him. And I said, are you just LinkedIn or are you friends? It's like, she said, oh no, he's a good friend. I'm like, well, I really want to join the board. Can you make an introduction? So she did, we had coffee, and I'm on the board. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to really make your way onto a board.
Yeah, great point. And, you know, just $5,000 isn't just $5,000 to that organization was a big deal. So, totally hear what you're saying, Barbara. So we want to leave room for Q&As. We've got a really robust conversation going on in the chat. But first, I want to thank our panel for sharing their insights and their experiences, you know, and their hopes for the future and what's trending in philanthropy. And before we close it out, I will stop here and, you know, just go to the chat, or if you want to come off mute and ask a question, you know, feel free to.
We do have a question in the chat. So it relates to trends that they are seeing, the panel is seeing right now in CSR versus ESG, and the role companies in advancing philanthropic initiatives and how they engage their employees and customers.
Anyone want to take a shot at that?
I'm happy to jump in. I think this has been really interesting. When I was at business school and I did a focus on CSR, and it was before it was, basically at that point it was ExxonMobil and PepsiCo, because they had to, cover up mistakes or right a wrong, right? Whereas now so many companies and these next generation, which we didn't talk as much about, like the next generation of donors and philanthropists in terms of like just embodying social impact and so much work that this next generation does. And so they're expecting their employers to have a DE&I statement, to not just have it written down, but to live it, to have purpose, have values. And so, we were working with the company right now, and it's like, where does CSR or your foundation sit within the organization? Is it internal is it marketing? Is it HR? How much money, resources, and attention does that department really have? And so I think it's shifting. A lot of large organizations had it. They used to have it because they had to, I think, in many cases, and it's shifting to now more new leaders are saying this is the type of organization I want to build. It's not perfect. And corporate philanthropy has some of its own challenges, because it is corporate philanthropy. Actually, I don't think actually should be put together in those words, right? But I think it is important, because on the other hand, there's a lot more money. There's a lot of money in the corporate community, and we need to expect our corporations and our business leaders to stand up and make moves to invest in our community. So I think we have to hold them accountable to do so, and we have to know that it can't just be a side project.
So I will say about ESG has become so vilified, and there's on the other hand, there's also a lot of greenwashing that has come with it because it was trendy, but now it's vilified because of the polarization of our political climate. But at the core of it, I think there are some really important, meaningful reasons for investors to invest with that ESG lens. It's essentially putting your money where you think is important. Outside of sort of giving directly through philanthropy, through your charity, I think that there's a possibility of a greater and deeper social change, if you will, that can happen through your own investments, your own investment portfolio, using a truly ESG lens.
Yeah, I would just quickly add that I think it's difficult sometimes for corporations to understand how to meet that ESG need. And so it really behooves nonprofits to create a turnkey opportunity to engage with corporations, usually from a kind of grassroots ideology that has been built up within the organization, where a staff person has been impacted by something, or a small group has found something that's really important to them, and it can bubble up, right, to the corporate level. And then if there is a nonprofit there that meets that needs, that can connect with them and can make it turnkey, it's really a win-win for staff and for the corporation.
Well, win-win is a great term to tie this up on. And there's so many great takeaways from today's conversation, and a lot of really things to think about as we continue to be philanthropists in our communities. We do encourage everyone here to take some kind of inspired action. Barbara had posted earlier on LinkedIn a saying that said, doing good feels good. And just keep in mind, whether it is, a small contribution, a larger contribution, making connections, using your influence. Again, everyone has something that humanity needs.